of the Mind website. But we will cease the recording for the open Q&A session. The music, when you enter in enjoying the music, is the original piece called Explorer by CCM Professor James Bounty. It was just one of the 166 creative and scholarly works submitted as part of today's celebration, and which you will learn more about this later. At this time, it is my great pleasure to welcome to our Life of the Mind event this afternoon, President Bevo Pinto, who would like to provide a briefly opening remarks. President Pinto, please.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Dean Wong, and Greg Loving and all the rest who have worked so hard to make Life of the Mind series possible. I'm pleased that our community is able to return to this important event. It's truly one of the best forums we offer for faculty to share their expertise, challenge one another, and learn something outside our field of expertise. I look forward to Professor Wright-Berryman's remarks today about mental health and to the important discussion that I'm sure will follow. You can get a group of faculty in a room, be it a virtual room, not have a good discussion. So I'm looking forward to that. Given the challenges presented by the last 2 years, this topic is of the utmost importance and one in which our university community holds a tremendous stake. UC, as you know, is a microcosm of our region and our society as a whole. Mental wellness is a challenge that remains stigmatized, often misunderstood, and largely undersourced across our nation. I won't take any more time from the program. I just wanted to express my appreciation for this series and today's presentation. This is definitely the high point of my day. It's one where I can relax and enjoy an intellectual presentation and discussion. So it's definitely very relaxing for me, and one where I will learn, and we're all here to learn. So events such as Life of the Mind provide us an opportunity to gather as a community, to confront and address complex challenges as we also support one another. So now back to Dean Wong to introduce today's featured faculty lecture.
Thank you, President Pinto. Before I introduce speaker, I also very happy to welcome BioFermi to his first Life of the Mind as the Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs and the Provost. Val, would you like to say a few words, please?
Sure. Thank you very much, Shimu, and thank you all for having me here. I think this is a great event. It is something that, as the Chief Academic Officer, I look forward to because it is the expression of the research, the work, the passion that many of you bring to your professions when you come here. So I think that's really a privilege and a pleasure to be here. And I know that there's been the faculty and staff that have submitted materials come from our 14 colleges and units. I think I'll get this wrong because probably I got the data a couple of days ago, but there's like 166 submitted works, which include obviously research journal articles, chapters, books, editing, and all kinds of other creative work, for example, that we just heard, for example. And so I think one of the things that is great of a university like ours is the moment when we can come together and share in these great achievements of our community. And just to riff a little bit on what the president just said, but also what Shimu said and what our distinguished faculty, Dr. Wright-Berryman, will bring to us. This is part of our mental health and emotional well-being. This is where we find our communities of caring that help us elevate in some way outside of some of the daily stresses. And so this is a very important time for us to gather together and have a moment where we can let go and listen to others and engage them. And from those conversations, gain some moment of reflection and peace that helps us all move forward. So having said that, I really should let the star of the show go ahead, and I will return the mic to Shimu. Thanks again for having me here.
Thank you. Thank you, Val. I'd be remiss if I did not point out that you actually submitted the works in this year's bibliography. Thank you for your participation as a scholar. Before I introduce the speaker, Professor Jennifer Wright-Berryman, I would like to take this moment to recognize the Life of the Mind Steering Committee's hard work, who planned and organized today's event. In addition to Greg Loving and myself, those members are Chuck Dong, Don Jason, Rita Kummer, Heather Nestor, Ned Scapetti, Lizzie Winja Stoppel, Melissa Cox-Morris, and Jenny Mack. Life of the Mind is brought to you by the UC Libraries and the Faculty Senate and the Faculty Enrichment Center. The Provost Office is the sponsor for this event. Life of the Mind is the annual lecture series, has been going on for many years now, and it features a distinguished UC faculty member presenting his or her works and expertise. After the remarks, a panel will respond to and discuss the lecture from a diverse perspective and engage the audience in further discussion. Once again, Life of the Mind this year has merged with the former author, editor, and composer to create one event that celebrates the achievement of the UC artist, author, editor, and composers. The 114 faculty and staff participate represent the 14 UC colleges and units this year. A bibliographer of the creative and scholarly work is available online. A link will be shared in the chat window with this meeting, and also can be found on the Life of the Mind website. In addition, a physical exhibit of this presented works is now available at the 4th and 5th floor of the Order C. Lansam Library. I am honored to present you our Life of the Mind faculty presenter, Dr. Jennifer Wright-Berryman, Associate Professor of Social Work in the College of Allied Health Sciences. Dr. Wright-Berryman began teaching at UC Blue Ash in 2013 and developed pre-social work program there. She then moved to the UC School of Social Work in the fall of 2014. Dr. Wright-Berryman research interests involve adolescent and adult suicide, severe mental disorders, and physical health among adults with severe mental disorders. Dr. Wright-Berryman is the clinical principal investigator for Convergent Health, a technology company using machine learning and natural language process to identify suicide risk. Dr. Wright-Berryman is also on the research team with the HOPE Squad, an international peer-to-peer school-based suicide prevention program. She teaches mental health policy and interprofessional suicide prevention program for the health professionals. Her presentation today, the title is Being a Campus Community That Cares, Emotional Wellbeing, Mental Health, and Suicide Prevention at the University of Cincinnati. Please join me in welcome Dr. Wright-Berryman. Jennifer, please.
Thank you so much. Dean Wong and the Life of the Mind Committee, President Pinto, Provost Fermi for making this happen and supporting this endeavor in the University of Cincinnati. I'm honored and grateful to be here and to share this time with you in conversation about emotional well-being, mental health, mental illness, suicide, and suicide prevention. I am going to go ahead and share my slides with you. And see what is, sorry, I was practicing and now they were set on the last one here. I want to invite all of you today into this conversation. That's what I would love for this to feel like. I know I'm going to be the one talking for the first 30 minutes or so, and then we're going to be having a conversation together. And I want to extend my deep gratitude to Drs. Brooks and Cohen, and also to Xander Wells, who have joined us today for the panel. I'm really looking forward to their thoughts, insights, comments, and questions, and then also the rest of everyone who's in the audience and part of the community who also have lived experience and ideas and things to share. So I just wanted to thank you so much for having me and for being here and being present with me today in this conversation. So thank you so much, Dean Wong, for that wonderful introduction. The other things that I am are a friend, I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I'm a teacher, I'm a daughter, I'm a sister. There are so many ways that we identify ourselves. And I think it's important that as we reflect today on how our emotional well-being and mental health and those of our colleagues, the students, the staff, the faculty, our UC community, we think about how we are alike and how we are different, and that we learn to appreciate that all of those things come into this conversation. I'm a suicidologist, and means I'm someone who studies the phenomenon of suicide and how to prevent it. And I've worked in mental health my entire career. I'm also someone who wants to do my part in making this world a place where our emotional well-being is the foundation for our strengths and our gifts and our talents. To me, it's important that we all understand that without a strong foundation of emotional well-being, the rest of our lives can become shaky. And so whether we're talking about our academics, whether we're talking about our personal lives, our personal relationships, our sense of community, our sense of belonging, all of that will be built on our personal emotional well-being. I want to start by talking about what is community. Is it a geographic location? Is it your neighborhood? Is it a place? Is it a group of people? Is it a person? Is it a system? I think there's community and then there's being community. And I think there are overlapping themes, and I think there are different themes in those concepts. But in my humble opinion, being community is a sense of a shared vision and a shared mission for how we want to thrive and how we want to have a quality of life and well-being at the University of Cincinnati. So I wanted to give you a couple of examples that have happened around what a shared vision is. And so many of you who didn't know what Lou Gehrig's disease or ALS was before the Ice Bucket Challenge, you certainly knew what it was during and after the Ice Bucket Challenge happened. So the Ice Bucket Challenge started with a young man who was a golfer who had, I think it was a cousin who had ALS, and he wanted to raise awareness. So he simply dumped a bucket of ice water on his head, created a video, and it went viral with over 2.5 million uploads and $220 million raised across the world for ALS research. In my mind, when I think of a spontaneous coming together around an issue where people who didn't even know what ALS was suddenly said, what is this thing? And people understood what Lou Gehrig's disease meant to the lives of people who suffered from it. and their family and their community members, they stood up and they dumped a bucket of ice water on their heads. What a profound show of community. Additionally, when I was preparing this talk, I was thinking about all the ways that communities come together to combat a certain problem or a concern that plagued either their geographic region or the livelihood of their community. And I started to dive into this research on Crime Stoppers. And what's really fascinating to me about Crime Stoppers is that it's not necessarily a professional organization. It's not a group of law enforcement folks who are training people to defend their territory. It is literally a group of community members who come together with a shared mission and a shared vision to reduce crime in their area. And according to 2 recent meta-analyses, these neighborhood crime watch programs are extremely significantly effective in reducing crime. And I think that is a model that goes unnoticed. People think, I see the signs up the street from where I live, a neighborhood crime watch, and people sort of take for granted that it's something that's out there, but does it affect me? It indeed affects you because it is an effective community model for reducing something that is plaguing a community. So I want to start to dive in a little bit deeper about how the University of Cincinnati as a community and our communities within our University of Cincinnati community can think and impact our emotional well-being, our mental health, and be suicide preventionists. I want to talk about how we can be a solution. The first example I want to share with you is something that started 700 years ago in Yale, Belgium. Saint Dymphna stood up and said, these folks that are affected, which, the language 700 years ago was certainly different than the language we're going to use today when we're talking about mental health concerns. Saint Dymphna stood up and said, these people that are afflicted or who seem different or are suffering will not be treated any differently than those who aren't struggling or suffering or afflicted with what appear to be, these sort of disorders or things that cause them to behave differently, act differently. In fact, people with mental illnesses were readily accepted into homes, into at the table. These folks were not stigmatized. And so it's interesting because when we have this conversation about mental health and mental illness, the word stigma always seems to come into play. We have a stigma, therefore we don't talk out loud about it. We give a lot of power to that word stigma. And so in a community like Yale, Belgium, where they 700 years ago didn't give power to that word stigma, they didn't give power to this idea that people with mental disorders should be separated out or treated differently. They have lived in community with each other, where people who are suffering or struggling are surrounded by people who accept them regardless. I want to talk a little bit about the differences between this concept of emotional well-being and mental health and mental illness. I think we take for granted sometimes that our emotional well-being is on a landscape. It is filled with hills and valleys. We can wake up feeling, kind of rough, and then midway through the day, we're feeling a little bit better, and at night we're feeling great, or vice versa, or any sort of point in between. Our mood can change, our feelings can change, our thoughts can change. And so it's important for us to understand that as human beings, we are filled with differing emotions, and we never know what, we're going to get when we interact with someone. And so I think to appreciate that emotional landscape is the first step in understanding how we can accept the emotional well-being and its differences and variations across different human beings. Conversely, mental health and mental illness could be viewed as this idea where when our emotions are managing us, as opposed to we're managing our emotions, sometimes our functioning is affected. So when my sort of intermittent sadness turns into deep despair, or if my nervousness or maybe random bouts of anxiety turns into chronic feelings of anxiety and panic, that is when my functioning really starts to be affected. That's when the places of my brain are signaling to me that maybe something isn't right and I need to interact with a professional, or I need to get some additional help. And so making that distinction, I think, is really important. We have really medicalized mental health. We have things like diagnoses and labels and medicines and treatments. And what we have lost in all of that is a sense that within our emotional well-being landscape, we are still people who have opportunities to combine our collective community efforts to navigate that together. So whether I'm a person suffering or struggling with a chronic mental health condition, or I'm simply someone who from a day-to-day basis may have varying emotions, I am still a member of my community, and I am still someone who wants to be engaged, be seen, and be heard. I can't talk about, a campus community without talking about stress. Certainly our students, our staff, and our faculty are no strangers to stress. What we have to think about is, when does stress become toxic? When does it sort of tip over from being that stress that, again, I can manage versus stress that is managing me? Again, when that stress starts to impact my functioning and we start to see ourselves unable to complete tasks and things in our daily lives that we would normally be able to manage, that is when we should really take notice, both in ourselves and in each other. There's a lot of data that look at campus mental health. And the University of Michigan does one of the most longitudinal, ongoing, large-scale studies of mental health on college campuses. And the most recent data sets show that about half of students are reporting clinically significant symptoms of depression and anxiety. And to note, it's important to note that that is the highest rate that they've seen since they started the study in 2007. Looking down, sort of drilling down into our UC data, our spring 2021 data from our National College Health Assessment, we had a small response rate, and I think I've been following these data for several years. We do tend to have a low response rate for this, but it is important, though, to learn from these data. Hopelessness was reported at almost 18%. Students feeling overwhelmed, half are exhausted, a third are lonely, a third are reporting feeling very sad, 13% are feeling so depressed it was difficult for them to function, and a third are reporting overwhelming anxiety. And the first thing I want to say to students, staff, and faculty is that because we're seeing these numbers, what we know is that people aren't alone in feeling this way. We have a community that cares. We also have a community opportunity to find and identify who is struggling, who is suffering, and make some connections so that we can lift people up and really address how to resolve some of these mental health concerns. So in terms of our emotional well-being and mental health, what are some things that we can do as non-experts? I always tell my students, I tell my friends, I tell my colleagues, you do not have to be a mental health expert to be present with people who are struggling, to lift them up, and to be community with them. I think the first and most important thing is to notice each other, not just when something's going wrong. Those are the times it's easy to notice, right? When professors see students turning assignments in later, asking for extensions, or saying, I'm struggling, it's easy to notice then. It's much more difficult to notice and to check in when things are going well. but I want to really encourage and challenge us to do just that, to check in. Every time I start a class, I check in with my students, and we spend a few critical, important moments at the beginning of class just checking in with each other, sort of taking our temperature on our emotional well-being. We need to connect with each other. Johann Hari wrote an amazing book called Lost Connections. It has really informed how I think about how we connect with each other. And I know that during this time of COVID, we have really experienced an exacerbation of those lost connections, which make it even more important to use the platforms that we do have to connect with each other, whether it's virtual, whether it's those moments that we do get to spend with each other in person, that we take advantage of those in connecting. And that means listening and validating, promoting community and belongingness. There are so many people walking around campus who are trying to feel that connection, trying to feel that sense of belongingness. And because we've become decentralized in some ways, we're struggling to do that. And I want to encourage us to find creative and new ways to connect. Responding to each other, sometimes that just means being president. I've got President Pinto's face right on my screen here. Being present, whether you're in a dorm, whether you're in a classroom, whether you're passing each other in the halls, whether you're in a virtual setting, responding matters. So if I see a student struggling on my screen and something's wrong, or they noticeably have their camera off when it's usually on, I might send them an email and check in and just say, hey, I just noticed that, we weren't as engaged today. Is there anything going on? Is there anything that you want to talk about? I try to invite them into a conversation without being too intrusive, and we'll talk about how this is a public health issue in a minute. But I think it's really important to invite the conversation and show your support, that you want to be present. Even if you're not an expert, being present matters so much. And at those times, when we find ourselves in those conversations where students are struggling beyond what we feel is our ability to understand or help or connect, that is when it is truly important to know your resources on campus and off campus. And so you have a community that supports you in supporting each other. And I will talk about those resources a little more in depth at the end of the presentation. What is suicide, and how can we make a community impact? So I've talked about emotional well-being and the landscape. I've talked a little bit about this is a short talk, so I'm crunching it all together, but talked about depression and anxiety, which are the most prevalent mental health concerns on college campuses. Now I want to talk about suicide, because it is a vital conversation. We are losing college students. We are hearing stories all the time about college students that are succumbing to their despair. And I want to describe to you the phenomenon of suicide, because it is riddled with myths and misconceptions. And I want to sort of clear up all of those things. Suicide is not something done out of some last minute rash decision. It feels that way sometimes, but it's not. People show signs, but sometimes depending on culture and the way that the community communicates about suicide, people do not talk about it. And, we talk about stigma, but I don't want to just brush it all under the rug by saying things are stigmatized. We have cultural norms that have been set up around mental health, that are known around mental health and suicide. And we really have to dive in and learn that language and learn about the cultural implications of suicide and mental health, so that we can extend our knowledge and understanding of these phenomenon in communities of color and religion and other systems that need additional understanding, so that we can, be community. Suicide is, I'm going to use my little tangled necklace. My daughter's actually on I'm the parent of two bear cats, a senior and a freshman. And my senior is actually watching me talk right now. And when she was young, she came home with, she spent her own money on this necklace that had sort of all these dangly pieces to it. And when she got it home from the store, it was all tangled up. And she was really upset, of course, because, sorry, Daniela, she was really upset, of course, because she spent her own money, her own hard-earned money on this piece of jewelry. So what we did is she worked on it, I worked on it, her brother worked on it, finally got it untangled, but it took all of us to get it untangled. Being tangled up inside is what despair can feel like. You've worked really hard to try and figure out the solutions to your own problems, the solutions that are, or the problems that are causing your despair. You've held on, you've tried to think about what's going to work, but things just keep coming at you. That despair grows. And so if I was a person in despair and feeling suicidal and deeply in emotional pain because I have this tangled up feeling inside, and I've tried to pull on those tangles, what happens when you pull on a tangle? The other side tightens, right? It's like a knot that you, as soon as you get one knot loose, the other knot just tightens up, and the frustration and the perturbance grows. What we have to do is, once we figured out that someone is tangled up, we want to offer our strength, our resources, our resilience, so that we can partner with people and be community with them in their place of despair. It can be frightening. It can be, you may question yourself, you may be uncertain, but being courageous in a place of uncertainty is what being community is about. So, I believe that that sense of tribe, that sense of community is that sense of belongingness that we are going to have to challenge ourselves to be if we are going to work toward a healthier, mentally healthier place of belonging for people who are struggling. Just to kind of give you sort of the picture, if you're unaware of the prevalence, the incidence of suicide in the United States, it is and has been for many years, 2 decades, the 10th leading cause of death overall. It is the 2nd leading cause of death for our young people, and the 4th leading cause of death for people 35 to 54. And it is a silent, it's a silent concern. People, because of all the different varying norms around talking about mental health and suicide, one example of that is, we still live under this cloud of white men are the ones who die the most, the demographic that dies the most from suicide. And this is related to both gun ownership, but also this idea that we still live under, men not being able to talk about their emotional health at all, but also with other men. And I'm really excited that Xander Wells, a student and representative from Men for Mental Health, a community initiative, is here. And I'm hoping he's on the panel. I'm hoping he might be able to share some of that with us. But these are the narratives that we have to change if we are going to change the culture around mental health and suicide and be community. So what is our shared mission? It's to reduce suicide rates, of course, and attempts and thoughts and behaviors. But how do we do that? We have to increase the protective factors. Community belongingness is a huge connection. Those are huge protective factors. If you go to the CDC website and you look at protective factors for suicide and suicide prevention, you are going to see connection, belongingness, and community. One of the things that I think is an important part of our shared mission is just being very explicit about advertising a sense of safety. When we think of safety, we think of physical safety, right? We think of campus safety protocols. We think of campus security. We think of campus police or law enforcement. I want us to think about emotional safety. I want us to think about, are our classrooms places for emotional safety? Are we people who provide emotional safety to each other? This kind of safety net is what being community is all about. So I think we should be advertising So those of us who start this journey of self-reflection about, am I a safe person? Do I create a safe community for people who are in emotional pain? We should be advertising that. I put it in my syllabus. I check in with my students, and it's on my office door. Now, granted, I do a lot of stuff from home at this point, but on my office door, we have these windows in our new Allied Health Sciences building that kind of cover the front of our offices. And we have these like cool markers that we can write messages. And my message is, this is a safe place. You can come into my office and talk. I will respect you. I will respect your struggle. I will honor you. And I will talk with you about what you're going through. And I think that is emotional safety and advertising safe places in the community for people to be real about what their struggles are. So that safety messaging could look a lot of different ways. You know, we could have explicit billboards. We could have explicit, you know, safety wear. I know that other communities in the UC community, I mean, I'm wearing my UC gear today because that's my larger community at UC. But, you know, maybe we could have sort of mental health wear. We could have lots of ways that we could explicitly communicate that we are striving to have a place for emotional safety and well-being. For this talk today, I developed a little bit of an idea called suicide stoppers that I'm going to share with you. But in that idea, we first have to make suicide prevention and mental health everybody's business. The biggest lie that suicide tells its victims is that you're a burden and no one wants to hear about your problems. And one of the biggest lies that people tell themselves about other people's emotional health is that's their personal business and I shouldn't get involved. These scripts have to change. These narratives have to change. We have to help people who are struggling to know that their struggles are not a burden and that we want to join with them and be present with them as a community member, whether it's to shepherd or warmly hand them to someone who can help if they need professional help, or to listen, to form that connection. An excellent example of getting involved in other people's health business is COVID, and the COVID beetles do not come together. They are 6 feet apart. They don't want to hold your hand, but they want you to get vaccinated, boosted. And I know this sounds like a PSA for COVID stuff, but essentially this is just a graphic to show that our community paradigm has changed. Whether you like it or not, you know, we are in a new age where we have learned that by things like wearing masks, getting vaccinated, socially distancing, that we're protecting others as well as ourselves. And I think we can use this new paradigm and translate it onto suicide prevention and mental health. We can change that from illness or disease being someone's personal problem to it being a community opportunity to address. So what about this suicide stoppers thing that I created just for this presentation? The idea here is, what if people who are struggling in their own community knew that everybody in that community was there for them? What if they walked out of their homes, their dorm rooms, their campus housing, or wherever, and walked into their community and said, I am surrounded by people who want to know how I'm doing. I am surrounded by people who support me even though I'm struggling. What if these communities cared for each other so much that when I noticed that you were struggling, I invited you to spend time together, just to be present. I wasn't afraid of you. I'm not afraid of your struggles. I'm not afraid of what you're going through. But let's sit together. Let's tell stories. Let's talk about our struggles and let's make plans together. Let's talk about the future. And so, you know, when I think about communities like this, does it have to be a program called Suicide Stoppers? No, it doesn't. But maybe that's a start. Maybe that is a place to build from. We have to make things like this fun and engaging. A research study that I did a few years ago of parents who had children who were in suicide prevention programs, I asked them, I said, are you involved? As a parent, are you getting involved in your child's community, you know, programming around suicide prevention? And they're like, we're afraid. You know, a lot of people are afraid of suicide prevention because suicide is a life and death issue. And so it's very frightening. So we have to make this mission, this vision engaging, and we might also, be able to make it fun. And so when I think about suicide prevention walks where people get together, they're telling stories together, we need to expand that. We need to give people other opportunities to come together and do something to raise awareness. ALS had the ice bucket challenge. So I came up with an idea about a tug of war against suicide. People who are feeling suicidal are feeling that pull. They're feeling that tension. They want to live and they don't want to live. They don't want their life to be a life of constant struggle. They are in that tension, that place of tension. So immediately my mind went to this tug of war challenge. Imagine this. Imagine a tug of war game where you've got people who are struggling partnered with people who are feeling strong and resilient, and they are teams. That team means that you are not having to use your strength as a person struggling by yourself. You are on a team with people who will help you with their strength and their resilience to help you overcome that struggle. So think about it, with the Ice Bucket Challenge doing something so international, so, awareness raising, I think that something like tug of war or whatever your idea might be could serve the same purpose, because again, it's this idea that we're pooling our strength, right? That we are not expecting people who are struggling to have all the strength. It's like hanging from like those bars in the playground. Imagine if you're hanging there, eventually your grasp will loosen, you will lose your strength, you will fall. But if you have people that come up beside you and hold you up and give you some of their strength, you don't have to use all of your own. This is the idea here. We are pooling our strength. We are pooling our resources. We are pooling our resistance because we want people to know you are not alone in this fight. I want to tell you why I'm using the word dude on a slide, but it's a quick little story. I was actually getting ready to board a plane, and the woman, the flight attendant on the overhead speaker said, "We will not be serving peanuts on this flight because there is someone with a peanut allergy." And I said to myself, I wonder if, the person heard, the person who suffers from the allergy heard the overhead speaker so that they feel safe going onto this airplane. And this gentleman sitting across from me said, "Oh my goodness, one person with a peanut allergy and we don't get our peanuts." And I leaned over to him and I smiled and I said, "Sir," I said, "what if that was me? What if I was the person with the peanut allergy and I just overheard you say that?" I said, "Everyone is your neighbor, dude." And that's how I responded. Now, admittedly, I tweeted about that and every peanut allergy advocate in the world loved it. It's the only one of my tweets that's ever gone semi-viral. I think I got like 200 retweets for that. I do all this work in suicide prevention and everybody retweets my advocacy for folks with peanut allergies. But the idea here is that even if you're a stranger, you can be a neighbor. It's interesting to me how somebody like State Farm will advertise and market that when you need a good neighbor, State Farm is there. I understand that using that as a marketing strategy probably gets people to sign up for their insurance, but I want us to think about how we can be neighbors and market ourselves as people who will be there in your time of need. I want to talk a little bit at the end here about this thing called a casserole paradox. If you've never heard about it, it's the idea that when someone is maybe been diagnosed with cancer or some other threatening disease or disorder, usually a physical disease or disorder, people will show up. They will offer, casseroles. They will cook for you. They will transport you. They will help you with your needs. But what if I'm struggling with some other condition that's not physical? What if you can't see it? But what if I've told my neighbor I'm really suffering? Is someone going to show up with casseroles if I'm suffering from depression? Is someone going to show up and help me help with my transportation if I'm feeling suicidal? Will someone come and clean my house if I'm overcome with anxiety? Not usually. That's what we need to change. We need to change this scripting around, what it means to be struggling. It's not just about physical health disorders. It is also about mental health. It is also about suicide and suicidality. So if you don't want to clean your house, I will lend you a hand, but we have to message that way. State Farm cannot be the only ones marketing that they're going to be a good neighbor. We also have to market ourselves that way. I just created this as a little visual about what a suicide stoppers, sort of initiative could look like. I'm not very good at creating hashtags. I should have asked my daughter to help me, but they're pretty long and not very legible, but you get the idea. Lastly, I wanted to talk to you about our campus resources. We are a large community with widespread resources. Tara Scarborough and I from CAPS have chatted just a little bit recently, and I am just completely enamored with her and the work that they're doing. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about what we have at our fingertips here. We do have CAPS, which is our counseling and psychological services. We have our care team, which will respond to crisis. And they have, if you go to their website, they have ways that you can reach out to them. We do have our student health. We do have partnerships with UC Health and the Lindner Center of Hope. We also have our Reach Out UC app. I would hold up my phone and show you, but I'm afraid with my background, you won't be able to see it. It is both on Android and iOS. And if you go and look for Reach Out UC, it's a red square with white lettering that says Reach Out. Embedded in that app are all of these resources in one place, so that if you are feeling like a student is struggling, staff, faculty members, someone that you want to help and you're not sure, you can go in there and you can get those resources. And coming soon will be embedded mental health services, co-located mental health services in the colleges. I don't know all the colleges and when they're going to get them, or if. I know at Allied Health Sciences, we are in the process of interviewing for that position now. And last but not least, I wanted to make sure that you have these crisis line numbers. If you or someone that you care about, or a student, staff, faculty member, someone in our UC community is struggling and you feel like it's a crisis, or you don't know and you want to check and see if it's a crisis, you take a picture with your phone, or Melissa has the slides. I'm happy for her to share those with you so that you can have the CAPS after hours line, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which does triage locally, and the crisis text line. It says you can text HOPE to 741-741, but honestly, you could text anything. Start, HOPE, help to 741-741. And last but not least, I think I said that twice now, I'm happy to help. I've done many talks on campus. I've done many talks off of campus. If you personally want some information or support, or you don't know where to go, or if you want some additional connections, I'm certainly happy to be there for you. I'm part of this community. I care about all of you, and I want to help. So there's my email address, and you can of course find me by typing my name into the search bar in the email. All right.
Thank you, Jennifer, very much for those comments. A lot to think about, and especially the concept of community, as our community has been so kind of discombobulated by COVID. It's just kind of thrown gasoline on some of these issues, but they've always been there. And we have a couple respondents coming up, as you know, that will deal with that from very different and interesting perspectives. Welcome, everyone. I'm Greg Loving, chair of the UC faculty and co-host with Shimo. And as he said before, we have 3 respondents, and let's get to those, because part of this event is to have conversation and to breed conversation among faculty, staff, students, everyone. So let me begin by introducing the 3. First, we have Kalisha Brooks, mental health activist at Soul Care; Kelly Cohen, the Brian H. Rowe Chair in Aerospace Engineering at the College of Engineering and Applied Science; and Xander Wells, UC student and president of Men for Mental Health. So to begin the discussion, Dr. Brooks will give a brief response to Professor Wright-Berryman's talk. She will be followed immediately by Dr. Cohen and then Mr. Wells. And after their responses, I'll open it up for questions. So panelists, when it's your turn to speak, if you're comfortable doing so, we sure welcome the camera, because that does contribute to a sense of community. So turn your camera on. Remember to keep your responses to about 5 minutes so we have time for questions. So I'll turn it over to Kalisha. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And thank you, Jennifer, for that presentation. As always, wonderful. So thanks for that information. Just a couple of points. A lot of the work that I do, you've ever worked with me, it's in intersectionality, right? So looking at all intersects of identity. And there was a recent study that was released from Johns Hopkins in April of 2021 that showed the spike in suicide mortality amongst communities of color, especially youth in these communities. So I think it's very, very important for us to just look at how we can provide insight and assessment and resources to these vulnerable populations, because of course you see that's a big part of this campus community as well. And unfortunately amongst, across a lot of universities in which I do, some consulting there, these communities of color, and as you mentioned, Jennifer, our community is our immunity, right? But unfortunately with these communities of color, that immunity has been weakened, over these past 2 years. And so you think of it of a compromised, your own compromised immunities, and how we have to focus on how do we build up these immunities? How do we help support? How do we help them with resources and, so many other things. And so I think it's really important for us to, again, when we talk about intersects of identity, the metaphor that I often see and use, if you've ever seen the movie The Birds, and how, you think of all of these massive birds surrounding a house, and this house is representative of an individual. And they have the windows open, the doors open. We can address one thing and say, shut the doors. So we shut the doors, but yet the windows are open. Okay, close the windows. Well, birds have already gotten into the house. How do we now address some of the things that people are impacted with, on an individual level? And that metaphor represents, the windows, the doors, just different aspects of people's identities that leave them vulnerable, especially as we talk about the mortality and suicide. And I just think that, I don't consider myself to be, I have my doctorate and everything in psychology, but these past 2 years just has really shown me, how much of I need more information, I need more education, I need more research. And, until we get to those places of getting all the information, like you said, Jennifer, just being a kind, decent human being, leaning into that sense of humanity, showing up for people, creating spaces for people. I think before we, until we can get all the research in, just being the best human you can be and creating presence. And, like we mentioned before, assessing the needs of these communities, finding out what they need, how has this culture or these cultures been impacted, and from there, build out the resources, the interventions, the exercises, the tools that's really needed. So again, thank you all so much for inviting me and for having me. And thank you, Jennifer, again, for that presentation.
Do I respond, Greg, or?
If you keep it to 1 minute, I will.
Okay. So thank you so much, Dr. Brooks. I really appreciate your insights, and you couldn't be more right. So the recent CDC data showed that especially in children under 13, Black children are 3 times as likely, 2 to 3 times as likely to die by suicide as white children. And what we have got to do, it is critical, it is a vital conversation. We have got to listen to our communities of color. We have to learn the language of mental health and suicide and what barriers might lie within the communities. So the only way we are going to impact our suicide rates in our Black youth is by finding out what the communities are saying, what they need, and how we can use the community framework and build on it with what we're learning. I mean, it's imperative. In fact, the Congressional Black Caucus has solicited the NIH for funding, and we just recently got some new calls for funding for research specifically for suicide prevention across Black youth groups.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'll turn it over to Kelly now.
A very good afternoon to everyone. Thank you, Professor Wright-Berryman, for your insightful talk. I've been at UC since 2007. My area of expertise includes machine learning and artificial intelligence. I've been working on a brand of AI called Explainable AI since 1994. And so, when the question is asked, what can you do in your research, we researchers, to help and assist. So the question I had faced was, what can AI do to assist in prevention of suicides? And I've worked with the College of Medicine. I did my sabbatical there in 2014, worked on bipolar disorders, brain concussion, and PTSD more recently. And the current state is that doctors examine patients' risks. They've got their past mental health diagnosis, instances of, say, substance abuse, and they try and draw on their experience, their training, their medical instinct, and they still fall short of yielding accurate predictions of how do you identify people with high risks. It's not that simple. So the question is, has anybody shown clearly that AI could assist with identifying people with high risk and then providing a program, an alternative strategy, being proactive in making that change? And here I'd like to talk about a recent study that was published in October of 2021, JAMA Open Network, which focuses on the Veteran Affairs program called the Reach Vet. The Reach Vet is a AI program that has been working since 2017. So they've been, in all, they have some 173,000 people went through the study. So that's quite a large study. And they tried to target, they use and collect 61 different data points per patient, per subject. And they take these points, and some of them are not that apparent. Is the person taking statins, or has the person suffered from arthritis? Now, having to take all that information and come up with a score, what is the risk that this specific patient would have for suicide is not that very clear or apparent, or the ability for somebody trained as a human to be able to do that level of number crunching. So the AI algorithm identified the 0.1% of those high risk people. And based on that, they came up with the strategy of having to, now what can you do different? Oh, you've got to make sure that guns and ammos are stored separately. Photos of your loved ones are always very visible. Phone numbers are at hand of friends, social workers, suicide hotlines, right? And this study demonstrated the following. The Reach Vet associated with greater treatment engagement, new safety plan documentation, fewer mental health admissions, fewer emergency depth visitors, and importantly, a reduction in suicide attempts. So this is relatively new. Now the question is, how do we take this paradigm that has worked into our community of a university and try to come up with a way to implement that? I was very happy to see that Professor Wright-Berryman is involved in a study using AI and ML. I don't know all the details, but I'd like her to let us know what she thinks of using technology and interacting with folk on campus that are studying in this and conducting research in this area to further come up with a way in which to enhance the quality of life and to be proactive in preventing suicides on campus. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Greg, is there time to respond?
Again, I'll give you 1 minute.
1 minute, okay.
Pretty good at that.
Yes,
so that's
yes.
fine.
So I am doing work with Clarigent Health. We use machine learning. We use natural language processing. So we are building on the work that John Pestian started at Children's Hospital probably 15 years ago, where he built, he initially used suicide notes to build a corpus of language data to start looking at how models can be built to identify suicide risk through language. It's also built off James Pennebaker's work, and that is all around the language of suicide, the language of mental health. And so through years and years of sort of validating these models, we now have a pretty successful venture where we are able to collect language. We're actually doing it remotely now. We're using designed prompts to solicit language data that are run through our ML models, and with a pretty good AUC. So we're doing that kind of work already. I think the public health approach is very promising because this type of it's considered a device at this point, can be implemented at, say, like your local pharmacy. You could go get your blood pressure checked, then you could spend 5 minutes answering a few prompts, and our language analyses could indicate high, medium, or low risk. Because of the lack of specificity and sensitivity to all suicide screening tools, we still have a long way to go there, but that triggers then an additional, like those data can be uploaded to your local provider or whoever you identify as sort of your mental health provider, your physical primary care provider, and then they can work with you to take the next steps. So that's in a nutshell the work that I'm doing, and I think that's how we can translate that into a public health approach, is by getting something like this program out into these places where people find themselves, and we can do more of that primary universal upstream screening.
Great, thank you. And finally, welcome, Xander. Well, I'll turn it over to you now.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm currently a third-year student here at the University of Cincinnati, double majoring in finance and psychology. And I actually had the privilege of getting to meet Dr. Wright-Berryman in high school, where I was a part of Mason's Hope Squad and was very fortunate to hear her speak. And I've been able to tap into her wonderful resources and her wisdom a few times throughout my career here at UC. And as far as my involvement goes, when I came to UC, I got heavily involved in the College of Business, with that being my primary major for the first couple of years. And I realized that mental health side, the emotional well-being that I emphasized so much throughout high school, was something that was missing and something that I wasn't able to pour into as much. And I really wanted to bring that back. And to begin with that, I took on the role and started the role as mental health chairman within my social fraternity, where I was able to found the Garnet Dot Initiative, which provides active members with signs of suicide training, QPR, question, persuade, refer training, and equips them with the tools that are going to be necessary to assist friends, peers, girlfriends, loved ones, anyone that they might interact with who may be struggling. They'll be able to get them to the professional support that they need. And those representatives display the Garnet Dot on their bedroom walls within the fraternity house. And that's an overarching symbol of support and solidarity for anyone living with mental illness. Then moving on, I was able to step into the role and co-found the organization Men for Mental Health with Dr. Wright-Berryman mentioned prior, where we actually got to have her speak to kick us off this year. And that group is composed primarily of men, although it is open to all Bearcats, and works to break down the stigma surrounding mental health a little bit within the community through educational meetings, getting to hear from wonderful professionals like Dr. Wright-Berryman. We've also gotten to work with the behavioral psychologists for FC Cincinnati and Mercy Health. We've gotten to do mindfulness with local yoga instructors, and we've gotten to hear from a lot of other great resources on how to further develop that mental health knowledge, and then also developing a support network and fostering that community amongst members through social activities, whether it's bowling or going out to get pizza after meetings, things like that, where students have friends and can open up to one another. And I think my perspective on this discussion stems and flows a lot into how mental health, emotional well-being, and suicidology are perceived by students. And I think the overarching and the undeniable fact is that a lot of students look at this with a perception of fear, and that stems from an idea of denial. When you think about college and you think about your time here, it's always preached that your time on a college campus is going to be the best 4 or 5 years of your life. And for a lot of people, it is. I mean, you look around at UC, we have incredible academic facilities, wonderful professors. We've got a football team gaining national attention. We've got local sports teams performing well. We've got a ton of resources and a ton of really awesome opportunities right at our fingertips. But the harsh reality is those 4 or 5 years are also really hard for a lot of people. It's their first time living on their own. They might not have that support system built in that they had throughout high school or throughout their younger years. And they're trying to really find their way as a young individual in life. And that's extremely difficult. And a lot of times that struggle can last longer than a day or a week. It prolongs to something more serious. And I think the conversation that we're having today about building the community, making individuals aware of the resources that are available, and not only making them aware, but making them accessible in a way that everyone knows and everyone knows how to connect with those is extremely important. And I'm extremely excited to be here, very appreciative of being here, and look forward to the remainder of the discussion.
Thank you. Jennifer, do you want your minute?
Of course I do.
Okay.
I tell you what, if we had 1,000 Xanders and I have just been so honored to watch him grow this plant and grow this seed of mental health awareness and suicide prevention in about every space he's entered. And he's just a light that shines. And so, you know, and thinking too about what Dr. Brooks was saying, when we have communities, whether it's a community of color, a community of religion, a community of gender and sexuality, intersecting communities, we have to find those champions and we have to find those voices of those champions who can help us learn about what those challenges are and what barriers they're facing. When we can understand more about that, that's when we can really start to break down walls and we can start building bridges. And Xander has just done an amazing job with that, and I'm so proud of him.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Wright-Berryman, and thanks to Kalisha Kelly and Xander for those interesting comments. I never guessed the AI aspect of it. And it's like that, very, very interesting. And so now the floor is going to be open for questions. We have between 15 and 20 minutes for questions.